Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Linux Utility Extravaganza. This is potentially going to be a series of live streams. But this particular live stream tonight, we're going to cover mainly, actually, I think entirely, terminal command line driven utilities for Linux. So, without further ado, let's jump into it and get things started. Okay, so as you can see here, I am in fact on my Ubuntu server connected via SSH. I've got Neofetch displayed, so you can see it's a 2204.2 LTS server, and it is up to date as of yesterday or this morning. So let's go ahead and jump into the utilities of the evening. So first I'm going to clear my screen, and if you're rather new to Linux, CTRL+L is the keyboard shortcut for clearing your screen. You don't have to type out clear. And here's a bonus tip. In Windows, in PowerShell, you can also use CTRL+L to clear your screen. And in macOS, in the terminal, you can also use CTRL+L to clear your screen. So, leveling the playing field, everywhere uses CTRL+L to clear your screen, unless you're on Windows using the old command processor that has its roots back in the DOS days, and then it's not going to work. But if you're running PowerShell, you're golden. Okay, so the first one we want to look at is top. I've shown this before. This is one of the simplest tools to get your feet wet in Linux, and it gives you information about the number of tasks running, the number of sleeping tasks, stopped and zombie tasks, the amount of CPU usage, memory usage, and swap space, which is, for people not familiar with the terminology, is equivalent to virtual memory on a Windows system, right? So, of course, you have to look at the reference material in order to know what you can do with top. But for just a quick overview of what's running and what's using more of your CPU time, this is a great utility, and it is included in nearly all Linux distributions as well as Mac OS, and if you have Windows subsystem for Linux, it is included there as well. So, top is great, but it might be a little basic. So then we've got htop. And in htop, you can see each of the 8 cores of the processor. You can see a little faux graphic of the memory usage and the swap usage, the number of tasks, load average, and your uptime. You've also got some ability to move around in the list on the bottom 2/3 of the screen, and you've got function keys around down on the bottom that gives you a guide on what you can do with htop. Htop is not included by default on all Linux distributions, but it can be installed on Debian-based distributions, so Debian, Ubuntu, Pop! OS, Mint, and I'm sure there are a dozen other ones that I'm not going to list off. Sudo apt install htop -y, so it doesn't give you the extra prompt, and hit enter, enter your sudo password, and you're good to go. You launch it by just typing htop at the command line. Okay, the next one is also not included by default. It's vmstat. Again, it's a simple utility, gives you information about your memory usage. So that virtual memory I listed before, your swap space, in normal Linux terminology, this utility, quick, easy, gives you an idea of what's going on. Now, the great thing is that you can do some things here. If you want to do vmstat and say May 9, 2023, it's going to redirect the output to the file, and then you can display it afterwards. Now, where this might be useful is if you're installing a program or if you're running a script, you might want to have some record and have this run as part of the script, redirected to a log file, and then you can dissect the log file afterwards and see if anything looks out of the ordinary. And we'll do one more, and then we'll jump over to chat and see who might be with us tonight. The next one, I know I've covered this at least once before, lsof, list open files. And again, this is going to tell you the file in this center section approximately. It's going to tell you the owner of the file, and it's going to give you some other things over here. Scroll back up a little bit. We should have a header. Maybe. Okay, well, let's pipe that into less. Okay, so you've got the command, you've got the process ID, task command, the user. Not sure what FD is off the top of my head. The type, and then it gives you node and name, and scrolling off the end of the screen. Again, another useful utility. If you run it with sudo, then you won't have the permission denied messages here. But even for a regular user, it is still a useful utility to know about, especially when you are troubleshooting. So, let me scroll my note up so I know where to start up again, and we will come over to the chat. TVJ, welcome, sir. Hopefully, I'm sure this is probably more review for you, but you know, people seem to like the Linux commands and the utilities and things, and so I'm trying to cover them in different ways. And if you've got a favorite utility that I don't talk about tonight, feel free to let me know, and I will either cover it at the end or cover it another night. So thank you for dropping in. I appreciate you. All right. Only have a couple people watching, so maybe Tuesday nights aren't quite the right night for me to go live. But hey, live and learn, right? Okay. The next utility on my list is tcpdump. Now, this one, you want to run as sudo, as a super user, and then you need to give it a parameter, and I is for interface, and my interface on this machine is ENS18. And so it is going to do a packet capture and give information here. Now, we could also take this and redirect to a file called packets and let this run for a minute or so, or a few seconds anyways, and cancel that, and then we can say less packets, and it will start, it will let you go through the file in a little more logical fashion. So keep in mind, I suppose I should say this, keep in mind that you have the option, once you have a log file or you've created a file like this, you have the option to use tools that are available to slice and dice that file to give you the information that you're really looking for. So one possible way to split this file is on spaces. So we've got spaces after the date and time code here, and then we've got the type of packet it is coming through here, and then this is going to be some sort of name of a machine, and that's actually an old name that I need to do some cleanup on. And so it's going to 255, 255, 255, 255. So that's going to be the broadcast address. And it's going to give you things like the length and things of that nature. So there are times when this is a great utility. Now, a lot of people are not going to be so enamored by tcpdump, but they might instead use Wireshark to capture packets, or they might use Tshark, which is the command line version of Wireshark, to do the same thing. So, but I like to at least talk about this a little bit so people know that it exists and there are options out there. You know, in a company, you might have limitations on what packages you're allowed to install. So if you can't use Tshark or Wireshark, then tcpdump might be your friend in that situation. All right, sticking with network utilities for a moment, netstat is the next utility. And we're going to do netstat-a, and we're going to pipe that into the more command, or you could use less, whatever makes you happy. And so again, you're going to see protocol, receive, send, local address, foreign address, and the state. And then some additional things down here at the bottom. Again, they're slightly different headers, but you've got, again, information that you can use for troubleshooting if necessary. Netstat is, again, not installed by default on most Linux distributions, and you can install it on Debian-based distributions. Sudo apt install net-tools. And again, we ran it with netstat-a, and we piped the output of that command into the more command, or you, like I said, you could use less and get the same functionality. All right. Moving forward. Sudo iotop. So we started off this session with top to see what processes were running on the machine. So iotop, you could probably surmise, is for input output. And this is what it displays. And by default, if you see down here at the bottom, config task delay account not enabled in kernel. Cannot determine swap in and IO percentage. So again, that's something I haven't researched deeply, but it shouldn't be a difficult problem to solve to get rid of that message. It's probably a kernel module that needs to be loaded to enable that functionality. Excuse me. Again, iostat is not installed by default. It is part of the systat package, SYSSTAT, and it came as part of the utilities installed with vmstat that we looked at earlier. So again, like many of the commands, Q to quit. And then we move on to another one I did a recent video on, or relatively recent. That's iptraf. And we could do IP traffic monitor and ENS18. And it's going to give you a counter of what's going on, the interface, any flags, and the TCP connections with the port numbers. Again, I wasn't really familiar with this utility until maybe a month ago when I did the dedicated video on this, but it is a useful utility and one that I think people should at least know about. So, and again, there are different things you can do with this. Statistical breakdown, and it will do different things here. Again, by the protocol and the port number, the number of packets, bytes, and then packets to and from. And again, just gives you a bit of a different view of information for troubleshooting. And so once again, this is not a utility included by default. You would install it with sudo apt install iptraf-ng, and then I always add the -y, so I'm not getting the extra prompt, and that will get you installed. If you are using a Red Hat type distribution, you would substitute and use DNF or yum depending on which distribution you're using, and you will likely get it installed as well. But as always, check the documentation, and you can do searches to find iptraf and keep things moving that way. So again, iptraf, I find it to be a useful utility. All right. Chaos Reigns. Hello there. Learn the Control L for clear already. Thanks for that. You're very welcome. Thank you for coming in. I don't think I've seen you in a live stream before. So, welcome. Feel free to ask questions in the chat, and I will try to answer them when we take a break from terminal land. So, TVJ says, I don't actually know a lot of the utilities. Well, hey, I hope to help remedy that if you want to keep them in your arsenal of things that you can pull out of your hat and impress or frighten people with. I was able to post an IT job today. Can't wait to ask the applicants if they know Linux and Cisco. Yeah, I've got sort of a love-hate relationship with Cisco. I can get around in it, but at the library we've got the Edge router and the Edge switch, and then we've got Unify for wireless. So I have not had to administer Cisco equipment, and in fact I don't think I own any Cisco equipment currently. So there is a place. I'm not saying that, but I'm not saying there's not, but there are places where running Cisco equipment would just be downright overkill, and it would blow out the budget. And public libraries are one of those places. All right, so I don't know it very well, but I can change VLANs and such. Yep, I've definitely done VLANs in Cisco land. I bought a book on Cisco, and I don't think I've got it in the office handy here, but what was it called? Cisco for the uninitiated, or something along that line. I'll torture you and make you look at the title of that book here real quick. That takes me back. I think I was teaching when I bought that. Cisco for the desperate. Yeah, Cisco for the desperate. Router and switch management the easy way. I bought that back in 2015, along with console cables. So that tells you anything there. And then in 2011, I bought a Cisco branded Linksys router for a project. And then I guess I've also got a copy of Cisco, A Beginner's Guide from 2009. But hey, it's all good. Let's see. On the dollars, I wouldn't buy it for home or anywhere I am in charge. I would love to try out some FS stuff. I see more and more people using it. Let's see. I did a bit of Cisco out of necessity at a previous job. Didn't break anything, so there's that. Yeah. Well, you know, hey, that's always a good thing. Howdy, everyone. I made it for once. Howdy, Jacob. Welcome. And with that, we're up to 4 people watching. So I'll take myself out of this one more time here and switch over to my notes. Okay, so excuse me. All right, clear my screen. So the next utility is the account utility, or at least that's the package name, ACCT, and to run it is just AC, and it's going to give you some information. But if you do -D, gives you some totals, and -P, it gives you by user or person. So print statistics about users connect time. This is another utility I was not aware of, really. I'd probably seen reference to it somewhere. This is not included by default in Ubuntu server. And to install it, it's sudo apt install ACCT with no spaces -y. So again, something else to think about, helpful if you're trying to figure out how long users are logged in, or if they're properly logging out at the end of the day, things of that nature. And you know, use your discretion on that information, of course. Okay, getting away from users and network stuff for a moment. The good old Midnight Commander utility, which I don't actually have installed. Sudo apt install MC. All right. Midnight Commander is your classic dual pane file manager. And so going way back to the DOS era, probably about 1987-ish, I'm guessing. I know I've read it somewhere, but don't quote me on that year. There was Norton Commander. Various versions of these dual pane file managers have cropped up different places. On the Commodore Amiga system back in the day, there was a utility, a graphical utility called Directory Opus, which was same type of thing. You had more commands down at the bottom and sort of shorter file display panes, but exact same idea. Many of the shortcut keys for copying and things like that were consistent with the Norton Commander utility in DOS. And here we are on Linux, and again, they've kept the same function key shortcuts to copy, move, delete, etc. It's worth noting this is also available on macOS, although I would exercise caution if you're using an Apple Silicon based Mac. I have made macOS crash when using Midnight Commander. It's one of the few ways I've made macOS 13 crash, but it the interesting part of it is that running it directly on macOS, it crashes. If I run it in a VM in Linux, it runs fine. Don't understand why, but it is what it is, I suppose. So let me see if I can quit out of that. I have to use the function key on my keyboard to hit F10. And again, the command to install that is sudo apt install mc for Midnight Commander -y. Okay. Going back to networking utilities. There is a utility called Nethogs. And as you could probably guess by the name, it monitors per process network bandwidth. One more time, this is not an included utility with your base install of Ubuntu Server. You can install it with sudo apt install nethogs -y. And to run it, you do sudo nethogs. And it is going to tell you the user and the program that is using network bandwidth. So obviously, if you have, for instance, a machine with Docker installed or something where a lot of users are connecting, you're going to see a lot more data flowing in and out. Currently, I only have the one user on this particular Ubuntu server install, so I didn't really set up to demo with multiple users, but maybe I'll package some of these into another, sort of dedicated video. Maybe I'll cluster some of the network utilities together and do a few more variations on things so that people get a better idea of what it can do. And Q to quit. And the next one, sticking with the overarching network theme tonight for utilities, iftop. Again, another network utilization. Network utilization utility. And it gives you the host name and or IP addressing on the left side. In the center, you've got host names or IP addresses again. And then on the right three columns, you've got input or transfer and receive amounts. So another handy utility to know about. So let me just scroll down in my notes here and come back, and I'll bring myself back on screen. You should chapter mark these streams. Yeah, some of these, especially the longer ones, I've been contemplating going back and doing some of that. Um, I think some of these are going to be pretty useful as reference material. Again, I might package them up or use them as inspiration when I finish building this Linux course that I'm working on. Um, and I actually attended a webinar this afternoon um, from put on by one of the LMS or learning management system companies that I have been looking into, and the topic for the webinar was how you can make use of artificial intelligence to help you generate outlines and things for a course. And their bottom line, it was kind of funny. Their bottom line was, well, you shouldn't use AI for things that you don't already have a level of knowledge in, because it doesn't always give you factually correct information. So it's like, well, I had kind of figured that one out already, but it's it's one of those things. Um, it was an interesting webinar. There were people that were trying to compare Chat GPT to the dark web, and it's like, you people have no clue. You've not done any research on it, and you're just throwing things out there. So, hello, Catherine. Welcome. Nethogs sounds like one I will have to try. Yeah, I was pretty impressed with it when I first ran it myself, and yeah, um, going through some of the preparation for this video tonight, this live stream tonight, has made me rethink a little bit on some of the material I was going to cover in the Linux course, and there are things that a lot of times get covered in Linux courses, like the history of Unix and things like that, that you can find 1,000 other places online, and I don't need to cover it in my voice to make a complete course. But some of these utilities I haven't seen covered other places, and so I think it's going to be more advantageous to cover some of these utilities, just to give people different ways of looking at the data, and then they have the knowledge to decide which tool they prefer for a given task, instead of having to do all this research to try to find these utilities. So as I've said many times before, I've been using Linux for over 25 years now, and there are still times when I'm surprised, and more often than not, when I sit down to do something, I end up learning something or relearning it in a slightly different way, because if you don't use stuff all the time, then you lose it, right? You can't remember everything. It's just not physically possible. But unless you've got one of those eidetic memory, was it eidetic? Basically a photographic memory, but I know that's not the technical term for it, but in common speak, it is what most people refer to as a photographic memory, which I was not lucky enough to get. So, let me switch back here. All right, and jump back over to my notes. So, the next one we've got is called Nigel's Monitor, or nmon for short. It's not included by default. You'd install it with sudo apt install nmon -y. And when you run it, nmon, and it gives you a nice key to what you can do with this. And you can do C for CPU, M for memory, R was one of them, and it gives you an adjusting display of information based on the shortcut keys. What was it? N was one of them. Let's see. So, and there we go. There's the network file system, which is not active. And etc. So again, you've got J for file systems, U for utilization, and V for virtual memory, N for network. This is one of those utilities, once you start using it and you're in it on a regular basis, you will probably learn the toggle keys that are useful to you. This is one of those utilities that's relatively new to me, so I don't have them memorized yet. And of course, Q to quit. All right. So, for those of you who were not here at the beginning, we started off by talking about top and htop for system and process monitoring. Well, you know, everybody is always out to reinvent the wheel and try to do it just a little better. So there are other system and process monitors that you can install. One is called atop. And it's blinking that we're running it in unprivileged mode, so we can quit out of that. And we ran it with sudo, and it's still saying unprivileged view. Why, I'm not entirely sure. Again, this one's, there it goes, it stopped. This one's relatively new to me. In fact, before the last couple days, as I was preparing stuff for this live stream, I don't think I'd used this one before. Again, you can use Q to quit. To install atop, it's sudo apt install atop-y. So, and then we've got bashtop. To install that, sudo apt install bashtop-y. And bashtop is spelled just like you would expect it to be spelled. And this is kind of like htop on steroids, where htop is using just basic characters, keyboard characters, to display information. Bashtop uses sort of the extended ASCII character set, so you've got colors in there and different things to make this particular display. Again, you know, it's going to be kind of a personal preference thing, whether this is useful to you. But at least you have the knowledge that it exists now. Okay, so we did bashtop. So then we've got one called smem, and this is going to tell you what processes are using swap space. And as you can see, I've got my system balanced out enough that nothing is using swap space, thus the zeros in that column sort of in the middle of the screen. Again, if you've got more users on a system, it might be advantageous to use this on a more regular basis. Okay, here's another built-in uptime. Tells you how long the system has been up and running. As you probably know, if you've been hanging around my channel for any length of time, I do a lot of my stuff as virtual machines. A lot of times I shut things down to save on electricity and not have the office so warm. But this VM has been up for 5 days. So obviously I had a reason to keep this VM up, and it was for a project. Thus, this live stream is happening. All right, and I guess the last utility I've got on my list is netstat. And oftentimes you will see people use the options TULPN. And so this gives you active internet connections. So you've got the protocol, you've got receive and send, local address, foreign address, the state, and the process ID or program name in the column all the way to the right. Another variation of this that people will often run is -nat. And again, it just gives you more or less the same information without the process ID program name column on the end, but it looks like everything else is the same. Again, if you've got more users, if you've got more connections for file sharing, for different things going on the server, maybe it's a web server, you know, what have you, netstat is going to be another useful utility. There is a version of netstat on Windows and Mac OS and BSD Unix. Basically anywhere and everywhere there's a network stack, there is a version of netstat. So that is my list of utilities. Again, a lot of these were sort of either system information based or network based, with a few surprises thrown in, I guess. But I hope this was useful to people. And yeah, let's jump to chat. Let me bring myself back on. All right, let's see. And we've got David from PE for Doers on. Welcome, sir. Let's see. What is swap used for these days? Do you really need it anymore? So if you've got a properly provisioned server, probably you don't need it anymore. In fact, a lot of the installs of Linux these days make swap optional. I was running one VM at the library, however. I was looking at earlier today, actually, and it actually had started using some swap space, but I've got a number of Docker containers running on that, so I shut it down and gave it some extra virtual RAM to use, and now it's not using swap space anymore. But I will monitor that VM for a while, and then if everything is looking good after another week or two, then I will probably turn off swap so that it's just not available to use. So that's most of my VMs at home do not use any swap unless I'm really trying to beat the heck out of them and get every last bit of performance out of it, and I didn't give it the extra memory. Finishing the opening and initial video setup video for your new camera. Let's see. Talking to Jay. What do you use for virtualization at the library? So, unfortunately, I'm dealing with and not for much longer. I'm dealing with VMware Workstation. This was a decision made before I took the job, and so my predecessor built the quote-unquote server in a almost cube case with a it's an AM4 motherboard with I think it's a Ryzen 5 2600, if I remember correctly. But they were running a local, when I took the job, they were running a local virus protection scheme, I guess you could say. It was Kaspersky, and most people know that Kaspersky is based out of Russia, and yeah, I wasn't real thrilled, and maintaining that server the way it was set up, the virtual server for Kaspersky, was problematic. So we ended up getting rid of Kaspersky because the library cooperative that our library is a part of were getting CrowdStrike, which had way more features than Kaspersky, and we got a substantial discount on it, which was better for the budget, and it meant that I didn't have to maintain an in-house virus scanning server. So, and since a lot of the other local libraries were standardizing on CrowdStrike, it made sense to go that route, because if I get hit by a bus, then somebody else could come in and say, okay, well, this is what he was doing and what they were using, and be able to step in and help out without a lot of fuss. So that virtual server obviously no longer being used for Kaspersky. It's being used for our in-house print server, which is also going to be going away because we're moving printers around, and we are getting a system called Uniflow, which has a a cloud-based option, and that is needed in order to allow patrons to send print jobs from their own devices. So basically, they email the print jobs to the Uniflow server, and then it comes into our print queue, and we release them to the printer, and then the documents are deleted. So that is hopefully going to be up and live the last week of May, which I'm looking forward to very much. And then I will not be using VMware Workstation, really. So I've got a couple of Linux VMs running a couple things. I've got some Docker containers running uptime Kuma, different things of that nature. Thankfully, I can export that VM, and what I would like to do is over the course of the summer, when we're not working Saturdays, go in and reconfigure the server such that I can back up the domain controller and potentially put Proxmox in there. We are small enough, the only machines attached to the domain controller are the staff machines, and we've got a staff of 5. So even running the domain controller virtualized is not going to see that much of a performance penalty. If it were a large corporation, then yes, I would have some reservations about running a virtualized primary domain controller, but given the size of the operation, I'm not so worried about it. So that's sort of my vision longer term, and maybe by August that will all be in place. But I want to do my due diligence, and I will take in one of my large external hard drives and back that up. I will test the restore here at home on my own network. If everything restores properly, then I will go forward with the plan at the library. So that's excuse me, that's one of the things that I've been thinking on and plotting out for a while now. And with that being a single processor system, I may actually get a support package for Proxmox to help support the development. So I'm kind of on the fence whether I want to do that during the Proxmox 7.4 life cycle, or if I want to wait for 8.0, which if, again, I've mentioned before, if they follow their track record, they go, they'll do an initial release. So 7.0, they'll do 7.1, 2, 3, 4, and then they will jump to the next larger major version instead of going to a 7.5. So we should see a Proxmox virtualization environment 8.0 later this summer or early fall. So unless they surprise us and they do a 7.5, which would be uncharacteristic of their history. So, all right. Been talking too much. I'm falling behind on my chat. So, how do you turn off swap? Well, Great question. So let me take your comment off screen. There is a command called swap on and swap off. And I haven't used these, but there is other documentation out there that will give you deeper examples. But swap off obviously will turn off the swap file. So yeah, that's kind of my plan, is to disable the swap file in that environment. But anyways, yeah, I've taken some formal Linux classes before where this topic was brought up. So I know the commands. Some of them, when I get to talking, they pop into my head. You know, just randomly or semi-randomly. So, and David brings up a good point. It will vary based on the OS, but the swap on and swap off are fairly consistent across different Linux versions. But of course, check the documentation, so that you know for sure. CrowdStrike is good. Yes, I've been very impressed with CrowdStrike, and one of the great things about it is that it has been really good at notifying me when, shall we say, kids are trying to do things that they shouldn't be doing on the public computers, like trying to install their favorite game that they downloaded from some rando website. So yeah, it's knowledge is power, and I love knowing about the things that are happening so that I can go have a, what some people would call, a come to Jesus moment with those kids. But I'm not opposed to scaring them a little bit if I have to. When I was a system software programmer and eventually the manager, those older Unix systems used swap a lot. Yes. And those systems only had hard drives, right? And I know, well, I guess I shouldn't say I know. I have been told that in some instances they put swap on a separate hard drive from the main system. So just building off from what I've talked about before when people have asked about custom partitioning and things of that nature. Let's see. Workstation isn't a bad product. If you self-host a lot of ESXi stuff, it can be very handy to pre-build VMs and then just push the VM to the host. Right. Unfortunately, we don't have an ESXi infrastructure. And yeah, if it were being used in that context, I would be all for keeping it. But yeah, that's just not what I was given to work with, and you know, as you could tell from my live streams, I have this tendency to try to attack problems as cost efficiently as possible, shall we say. And I know there's a free version of ESXi and all that, but yeah. Let's see. That new print server sounds interesting. Yeah, it's one of the products. Um, Canon. We've got a Canon, a larger Canon printer, but Uniflow is based on something else, and I don't remember what what that other product is. The downside of it is that the server has to be running on a Windows system, and in all actuality, I could probably replace our Windows server system with something like Zenshal or Univention corporate server, something along that line, and not have to worry about the Microsoft licensing. And that may be a consideration down the road, in all honesty. But yeah, it's an interesting system. It gives the staff the control to not have patrons direct print anymore. So they send their print job, we have to release it to the printer, and that avoids things like, oh, I didn't mean to print it in black and white, I wanted it in color. And then they don't want to pay for the prints that they sent in black and white. Or, I sent 4 copies of that and I only want one, type of thing. It has saved us resources of paper and toner in the process, just having the on-prem version and moving to the cloud-based version, which, again, if it were me for home use, no, I wouldn't do it, but for the environment we've got at the library, it's one of a few choices, because the competitor to Uniflow, called Papercut, has been getting all kinds of exploits lately, and like in the wild exploited, not just a 0-day, but they're actively exploiting it. So yeah. Chaos Rain says, love Proxmox. I do as well. Ron, welcome, sir. Thank you for stopping in. I do appreciate your consistency on leaving me comments on my videos. It's always nice to see. So, thank you. Let's see. We're past the JAU. My comments seem to be locked out for a few minutes. Not sure why. I didn't set anything particularly different on this video for the live stream. But who knows? There could be some glitch happening or something on the back end. I don't think I was bad. Thanks, I finally made it. Glad to have you here, sir. All right. Do any of you have any questions or other comments? We've been going for an hour and 9 minutes and almost 20 seconds. Beep. So, yeah, I mean, this was kind of a fun live stream to put together for me, because I definitely learned some new things, or refreshed my brain on some things that I'd been exposed to at some point or another and hadn't ended up using. Let's bring myself on the screen here. And so, one of the things I want to do in a subsequent live stream, whether it's this coming Sunday or whether it's another weekday evening live stream. But I want to do a similar live stream, but cover Linux utilities that run from the desktop. So the graphical utilities versus command line utilities. And I know there's utilities there that I don't or haven't used. And I think that'll be interesting. I know, there are people out there that use Linux but aren't comfortable enough to use strictly the server version without a GUI. So this might be one of those places where we can get some of that overlap happening and cater to a slightly different part of the audience. So let's see. Our new printer setup will be card based and it will only print out when you swipe a card. Yeah. And some of the larger libraries do similar things. The problem is the technology to do that, to implement it for a public library type implementation is more expensive to acquire and maintain, because we would have to have different library cards that would have to have probably NFC near field communication, I'm guessing, but there could be some other technology that will do that. I don't think most of the solutions will just use the regular barcodes that we've got on our current library cards. So we would have to do something different there. And they just changed library cards, so we've still got a boatload of them left, like less than 5 years ago. So if I had a budget to support that, I would love to do it. Right now, I don't, and I'm lucky to be able to do this project and be able to offer it. But I just I have to operate within the constraints that I'm presented in that environment. It's interesting. There are days it's mind-boggling, and there are days that things go all right, but it's never truly boring. I'm still a big fan of XCP-ng. Yeah, I like the product. I ran it for a while. I had been running Proxmox before XCP-ng at home. I had run Zen server when I was teaching. And so when XCP-ng came about, I thought, oh, well, I'll just run that at home. But the... I didn't really want to pay for the graphical interface part of it, and the PHP based system that you could use with the old Zen server had sat unmaintained for a number of years and was flaky at best. So I had ended up moving back to Proxmox because at least when I last evaluated it, the Zen Orchestra, excuse me, it was being developed in such a fast pace that it was becoming more work just to keep things up to date um, than it you know than a comparable Proxmox system. Um, and who knows? I may set up an XCP-ng server at some point and just reevaluate this. I know Tom Lawrence swears by it, but then you've got his co-conspirator for the Home Lab show, Jay LaCroix, who is in the Proxmox camp, and they both say good things about the other product. For me at home, I'm running Proxmox, but if the opportunity presented itself to run and maintain an XCP-ng install, then I would not hesitate to do that. Once you know one virtualization platform, you can get up to speed in the others relatively quickly. To this day, I maintain that. Just like if you learn to drive an automatic transmission vehicle in a Toyota, you can get in a Chevy and drive it with very little issue. But when it comes to computers, people have this mind explosion that, I can't use a GUI if it doesn't look like Windows, and thus all the, in my eyes, wasted effort trying to skin Linux to look like Windows. There are things that Windows does well, and there are things that it's still behind. It's right now, in my eyes, Windows is the most usable it has ever been. If we had been to, the maturity of a Windows 10, like a 22H2 Windows 10 with Winget and PowerShell, back when I was, looking for a platform to replace my Amigas back in the late 90s, I may have standardized on Windows, but at that point it was Windows 98. There were no, multiple desktops. The command line in comparison was lackluster. It wasn't a true preemptive multitasking system until you got on an NT kernel-based version of Windows. So Windows 2000 or Windows XP. XP being where most people saw that for the first time. And yeah, I mean, even way back then, you had package managers on Linux, and it wasn't until the last 4 years ago that, Winget became a thing, packaged and included by Microsoft. So, it's one of those things. And then, Microsoft has recently announced that 22H2 is the last feature update version of Windows 10. And, they're going back to a new version of Windows every 3 years like they used to do. So, Windows 11 is here, but in 2024, we're looking at Windows 12. So, it's one of those things. And I don't think it's a stretch to predict that Windows 12 and subsequent versions are going to continue to more follow what Apple has been doing and putting stricter constraints on what hardware will run new versions of the OS. So it is what it is, you know. So we will see. Let's see. You work for government, which I know all too well. Yes. And in fact, we're waiting for money from the library cooperative in order to be able to pay for this print server project that's coming up the end of the month. So I've had to, you know, ask questions of our vendor like, do you need to be paid the day the work is done, or will you invoice us and give us 15 days to pay, type of thing, because we only know that the checks are going to come sometime during the month of May. So if we have 15 days from the 26th to pay, then we should be golden. So, Zen Orchestra actually released an update to their backup tool that made backups go faster. It's awesome to see them improving things. Yeah, that's, I don't think I ever played with their backup tool when I used Zen Orchestra. I'm not entirely sure if it was even there. But it's been a few years now since I've last used Zen Orchestra. I still get the email updates from the developer. I think his name is Oliver, if I remember correctly. But yeah, I should back up all my VMs from one of my nodes on this super micro super server, the 2-node monster, and you know, at least for a short term, run Zen XCP-ng and Zen Orchestra on it, and just play around with the system. Maybe do a few videos comparing the two, and you know, but yeah, you know, it's just one of those things. I'm deep enough into Proxmox world now. I don't know as though I will ever fully switch, but it might be nice to have, you know, at least one machine running XCP-ng, doing some things in the background to just have it as a resource. I can use GUI even in Linux. It can be adapted to. Yes, that's exactly the point I was making, Catherine. You know, if you can use a mouse in one operating system, you can use the mouse anywhere. You know, you can adapt from Microsoft Word to LibreOffice Writer to whatever the word processor is on Mac OS that Apple includes in iWork, to you know, Google Docs, and in all of them, you know, Control B is going to be bold, and Control I is going to be italics, and Control U is going to be underline. And the difference on a Mac is that you use Command instead of Control. It's not rocket science. It's easy to figure out. I move interchangeably between all three systems on at least a weekly basis, sometimes on a daily basis. And you know, it boggles my mind what the disconnect is in people's heads. And you know, that's one place where I wish I would have like minored in sociology or psychology, just so I could understand the end user a little more. But you know, if I did that, I may want to even more beat my head against a brick wall when I have to deal with the end users. So I think anybody that's been in a support position of any sort has been there. Let's see. Windows 10 already gets neglected by Microsoft. They concentrate on Windows 11. Yep. And it won't be long before Windows 11 is going to suffer the same fate, and they'll be concentrating on Windows 12. You know, they were content when Apple was releasing, you know, OS X, and it was 10 dot, you know, up to 15, and then they started increasing the version numbers, the major version numbers. So, you know, Mac OS is on version 13 now, with 14 due out in the fall, and here's Microsoft stuck on Windows 11. So it's interesting how the companies play off from each other, and seemingly, maybe not completely, but seemingly make decisions based on what the other company does, or the perception of what the other company does. I would love to see you run tcpdump on your dual node server, then run your VMs in high availability. Yeah, I honestly don't even have high availability set up for my Proxmox right now, because you need 3 machines to run a cluster for the high availability. And I haven't gone down that rabbit hole yet, but I've got enough raw storage space on my NAS right now that I could back up all my VMs from Proxmox, and I could at least temporarily run xcpng on both nodes, and you know, give it a real workout. Ouch. Then you could pull out a node and watch them continue to run. Yeah. I don't know if I'd want to pull out a node while it was powered on, but I'd have to consult with my supplier of Supermicro equipment, Jason from Canada, and see if that's something that this thing would even handle. I really don't have the money to replace it if it didn't handle it, so yeah. I made a parts list with an FCLGA 4677 2495X Intel Xeon W7 with an Asus WS Ace for VM in a data center. It will run VMs and a lot of them. Yeah, I'm sure it would. I'm not too familiar with the specs on the Xeons, but I know that the Xeons in this server, each node has 56 cores. There's two 28 core, two 14 core processors with hyperthreading. So 56 cores per node, and 64 gigs of RAM. So it's no slouch over here, but anyways, David says it sounds like a fantastic system. Yep, sounds like an expensive system. All right, everybody, it's been just about 90 minutes. I'll hold off for the last 32 seconds, and then we'll wrap up for the night. And I am going to go check out one of the channels that I follow, just a guilty pleasure channel. And actually, let me put this up on screen, because it's kind of fun to watch. And if others can get some enjoyment out of his channel and give him a few views, so be it. So this guy, his name is Dan. He's an English guy, but he's living in France. And he bought a chateau that had been through a fire like 35 years ago. And it had basically sat abandoned since the fire. And Dan is going through and cleaning up the rubble and getting ready to restore this. He's installed 2 floors that had been burned out. Just, you know, the subfloor and the floor joists. And it's been really interesting to watch. And let me go to his channel, and I will just dump this here in the chat. But I've really enjoyed watching Dan and the progress that he's been making. And he just posted a new video an hour ago, 30 minutes into this live stream. So that's what I'm going to go watch when we get done, and then make some dinner and start a little laundry. Because, you know, household chores, right? So I just want to thank everybody for coming out. We're now at an hour and 31 minutes. You know, this has been fun, and it's been as much or more fun just chatting with people and reading through comments as it was talking through all the utilities at in the first part of the live stream. But I hope people got some value out of this. And if you're watching this after the fact, please leave some comments for everybody. If you can like, and if you're not subscribed and you're seeing this, it doesn't cost you anything. Hit that subscribe button and, you know, join the family here. Trying to build a community around the channel, and the more the merrier, right? So on that note, thank you all once again. Have a great night. At least here in Michigan, the weather is lovely right now. So I may go out and sit on the deck for a little while after I watch Dan's new video. And yeah, have a great night. The plan is for a live stream on Sunday, same time as normal, 12:30 Eastern. And I'll see y'all then. Have a great night, everybody.